A very good evening to you. Welcome to News at Prime, right here on Newsroom Africa, Channel 405. I'm Tami Ngubeni. Now, in January of 2021, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced the appointment of several individuals to the National Prosecuting Authority with the main aim of strengthening the body's capacity, particularly as it fights key issues, including corruption as well as gender-based violence. Last night, he also announced the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. Joining us now is legal expert Martin van Staden, as well as Berenice from the Institute of Risk Management of South Africa. A very good evening to both of you. Thank you so much for your time today. So perhaps let me ask you first, Mr. van Staden, what do you think this is? Do you think it's a waste of time, a waste of money, or could there be something in there?
Well, I think it is a waste of time and a waste of money. I think South Africans would do very well to not allow the announcement of this commission to distract from the fact that we are in the midst of a constitutional crisis where the Constitutional Court has ordered former President Jacob Zuma to appear before the State Capture Commission, and he has ignored it, and the executive government has taken absolutely no action. So it's clear that there is very little political will in this country to really and truly and substantially address corruption, and I don't think the establishment of yet another council or commission is going to help that. But even more so on a more technical level, as advocate Paul Hoffman of Accountability Now noted in Business Day today, this commission, this council will not be the new one that President Ramaphosa announced. It is not legally entrenched. It can be taken away just as easily as it was established. We need to remember that government is the one which is accused of being corrupt, and government is the one establishing the commission, meaning that any future corrupt government can simply undo the commission. We must ask ourselves, is it really wise to have the government investigating itself? Maybe it's time to consider having the public, or at least independent international parties, brought into the fold and to really address this problem at its root.
The fact, Mr. Staden, that the president said that this commission would report directly to Parliament, does that not give you a sense of comfort that it won't report to the executive but to Parliament?
I wish it did, but it doesn't. As we've heard at the Zondo Commission recently as well, Parliament has been very lax in its oversight role. And I mean, we've really seen this for a long time. That's not to say Parliament is totally useless at ensuring the executive does not engage in criminal behavior. But we must remember, and this is crucial, there's a political reality and then there's legal technical aspects. The political reality is that those who are accused of being corrupt are part of the same political formation that controls government and as a result controls Parliament. It's the nature of politics, and that is why we truly need, I think, an independent body that is in very little way or in no way connected to political formations to really take on corruption. And the courts are part of that. But when the Constitutional Court itself is being ignored summarily, we have a problem.
Ms. Francis, let me bring you in here. Do you share Mr. van Staden's sentiments? He's clearly very pessimistic about the formation of this anti-corruption unit or body that will report directly to Parliament. What are your thoughts?
I'm not as pessimistic. I do think that it comes back to what the intent and mandate of that council is, and as rightly said, how we construct that and who the individuals are, and who they report to it. I do think that you need to take the stance on corruption together with the view that we are going to be reviewing SOEs and their governance structures. So when we look at what is corruption and how it happens, is around opportunities to allow corruption. So whether it's your structure, your systems, your people, and then, how do you then hold people accountable when things happen? And yes, we don't have a great track record in terms of holding people accountable, but the fact that we do now have a national advisory body, and again, what is the intent of that body, and how will they then implement? So I think that the tick is, the what if. So even if you get advice, we will be empowered to actually act on that advice. So I'm not as pessimistic, and I think it's a step in the right direction, and it's something that we if he hadn't have done something like that, the president, I would have asked why not, given the levels that we've seen, and given how important it is in terms of meeting our operational and our national goals.
What's quite clear, Ms. Francis, is that a lot of these issues that we're dealing with as a country are not insular, they're not isolated, they're somehow interlinked. And in his response, Mr. van Staden spoke about the fact that Parliament is really constituted mainly by the ruling party itself, that the report back will be coming to those who seemingly don't have a political will to effect any change. And as we've been hearing from the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, that there seems to be a lack of will of holding a parliament to, or rather the executive to account. What would need to change in perhaps our parliamentary structure in order for us not to be ring-fenced in such a way as a nation that we can actually have a parliament that is accountable to its people and will not be out there to basically protect itself?
Look, I think what needs to happen is we first need to be very clear about how different this will be from maybe the commissions that have been set up. So my understanding, and it's still early days, is that this is an advisory council, and it's meant to look at our governance and government and its systems and structures holistically, taking a lot of the feedback that we've been getting so far. So a lot of what we've been seeing is people coming through and essentially providing feedback on their experiences, and people have been asked and subpoenaed to come in and speak on that. What's important is to actually ask, well, how will this advisory committee be constituted? What exactly will their teeth be? Because again, to have an advisory committee without any clear teeth or powers, and then the issues regarding Parliament and how it's structured, and I think the reference that we were making maybe is to SCOPA, which from an oversight perspective has always been the body that Parliament goes to, which is made up of many political bodies. But how is it different? And then again, we need to start seeing action. So what we are all tired of is talking about and knowing about corruption, but not necessarily seeing anyone being held accountable for clear abuse of government funds and public funds, or private individuals interfering with government processes. So I think that's where South Africans are finding it frustrating. And I'm sure also the public sector is finding it frustrating. Having been in the public sector for a long time, we have many colleagues there who are extremely competent and are not corrupt. And yet, unfortunately, because of the national interest, are being tarred with a brush that's not that's not fair or applicable to them. So the cook get to implementing and acting on what we know, because it's not just about, how did we make those decisions, but did we implement those decisions? And that's what the advisory council needs to be. It needs to take a holistic look at, and as I said, we also, the president's also mentioned the creation of an overview of how SOEs are governed. And because corruption doesn't happen in isolation. It's around how we've been structured, what are the unintended consequences of how we work? Are we overcomplicating certain things and then allowing gaps that people can take advantage of? And, when we look at corruption itself, South Africa is not unique. And we are very embroiled in it, and we're very aware of it. But the world itself, in terms of this year's WF risk ratings, they have recognized things like cybersecurity, which is essentially fraud and corruption, but fraud and corruption from a physical to a virtual land. So fraud and corruption is something that many governments have to tackle, that many governments are seeing, because there's always opportunities. Our trick as South Africa is to close those opportunities, to not allow our internal inabilities or our internal politics to create opportunities that are easy to take advantage of, and then not to prosecute the people who are clearly corrupt or engaging those activities, and then also stealing public money. And I think that's where the advisory council really needs to play a role.
Let me bring Mr. van Staden in here. How do you believe that this advisory council, this advisory body, actually needs to be constituted in order for it to have the desired impact? And what powers will it need to be given in order to be effective?
Yeah, so I would firstly recommend taking it entirely out of political hands. So, for instance, set up an electoral college of retired judges and have them from their own membership choose the individuals who will make up this council. I would then no longer make an advisory council, but give it power similar to the Zondo Commission, the power of subpoena, etc., to bring people before it to testify, almost like a court, and then to from the council itself to refer matters to the National Prosecuting Authority, or to work in conjunction with it, and eventually to get those matters to court. I would remove any ministerial involvement. I will remove any presidential involvement, any parliamentary involvement, because fundamentally all of these institutions have an interest, a political interest, in what the outcome of investigations are, and you want to remove that political interest as far as possible. And I think the closest practically that you're going to get to that is, like I said, an electoral college of retired judges who from their own membership designate the members of this council. That would be my immediate practical recommendation.
You know, in our previous conversation, just before we spoke to you, we're speaking to Mr. Ivor Sarakinsky, talking about the state-owned enterprises and the centralized model that the president was speaking about yesterday. And one of the key things that he mentioned as well is depoliticizing that particular centralized model. And you mentioned that too, Mr. van Staden, the fact that in order for this to work, it will have to be depoliticized. Let me ask you, Ms. Francis, what then does this say about our political structure, the faith and the trust that we have in our existing political systems, if everything that we need set up needs to be devoid of that political influence?
Look, it speaks about credibility and a lack of credibility and possible trust. So our politicians need to start rebuilding that. And one of the first things is around, looking at what integrity means, and it's about what we say and what we do versus, how we're actually acting. So the lack of credibility is a key issue, and we do need to rebuild that. The reality is that whether it's public officials or the political world or the political arm, they need to work together. You can't divorce the two. So I do think that nothing's going to work if you completely divorce the politicians from whether it's SOEs or public officials, because ultimately they set the broader vision for the country. So what you need to do is just have politicians who are a lot more credible and politicians who are held accountable. So I don't see how an SOE governance structure can't work without oversight or alignment with what we're trying to do as a country, if there isn't some political mechanisms to do that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I think we'll leave it at that for this evening. So really, it's about striking a balance and having trust all around with all the stakeholders who are involved. Thank you very much for your insight and your time tonight. That was legal expert Martin van Staden and Berenice Francis from the Institute of Risk Management of South Africa. Do stay with us. We'll recap some of the top stories and headlines when we just return, and also look at our top political stories of the day.